everybody, it's Norm from Tested.
And it's Jeremy from Tested.
Welcome to the latest episode of Projections, our show about the amazing world of virtual and augmented reality. You know, so often we talk about VR's applications in entertainment and video games.
Yes, because that's usually what people are doing.
Absolutely.
What else are people doing?
Well, there's VR, it's a whole different platform. Think of it as a computing platform, and the thing that people do a lot on computers is more productivity.
I love it.
Word, Microsoft Word, typing in VR.
I don't know about that yet.
I don't know about that yet, but maybe some creative tools. So we want to spend some time today to talk about the potential of VR and some examples that developers have made in building design tools and productivity tools in a virtual environment, and how different companies have to use different approaches for what the UI and the user experience is. Now, all of this kind of really got kickstarted with our first use of Google's Tilt Brush.
That's right, yeah, they were kind of first to the table here on the Vive platform. And that was the first time that I ever drew something in VR. It was one of the first VR experiences I think I actually had. And it was wonderful because you could draw and then you could step inside of it and you could move your brush and create different cool little color patterns. I wasn't sure where that was headed because it's a different kind of analog, that you've never painted two-dimensional things in 3D space before.
And it was a perfect demo of one motion track controllers. It was built into that Vive demo suite back in 2015 when we first used those controllers, and also room scale VR. When you talked about moving around your drawing, walking into your drawing, volumetric space, and painting, that's physics-defying rules.
Yeah. The thing about that experience that struck me was that this was a new form of artistry. That this was not something that was trying to emulate a real-world experience. One of the later additions to this kind of genre of software, Oculus Medium, is more of a sculpting app, where it does feel like it's emulating that sculpting experience, but in a more powerful, three-dimensional way. But Tilt Brush specifically struck me as a new thing.
Yeah.
That we would see forms of artwork come out of this that could only really be created using that kind of software.
And to its credit, it was a new way of thinking about that type of painting, but also one of its limitations is that it only exists in VR. So as a creative tool, yes, a lot of different forms of creative expression. We've seen animators, cartoonists work with Google Tilt Brush and create wonderful, wonderful 3D volumetric drawings, but the process to get that data and export it to something that you can use in a 2D environment, whether it's for a video, an animation, there's been a hurdle for that. Oculus Medium, which you mentioned, took the opposite approach, whereas instead of painting, it was sculpting.
Right.
And Oculus has now made two tools to show creativity and artistry and productivity in VR, Oculus Medium and Quill.
I think Quill is their version of Tilt Brush in some ways, but they've taken it to the next level. I mean, it really feels more like Photoshop. The interface is much more deep, complex, a little techie, but that goes with the depth. And they have done a very smart thing, which is to demonstrate their software using a free demo called Dear Angelica.
It's part of their Oculus Story Studio.
Right.
The difference between Oculus Medium and the Quill program isn't just one sculpting and one is volumetric painting, but for Oculus Medium, they didn't use that as a tool to make a piece of content, a video, an Oculus Story, a VR experience.
Not that we've seen yet.
Not that we've seen yet, and that was kind of like more of a free-form sculpting tool. With Quill, they did build in actual depth to the program. So yes, you are painting, but you can also add music, you can script animations, and they can generate full experiences like Dear Angelica, which is a beautiful, amazing story created with one tool.
It's super cool. And Medium didn't Frank use Medium in order to sculpt some things in VR that he could later 3D print?
Yeah, and that's really the next step. Like, I think talking to a lot of artists, 3D artists, everyone's excited about the potential of VR because it allows you to interact with the thing you're modeling, 3D modeling, in a way that on a 2D screen or even with 3D glasses, you couldn't really experience before. There are a lot of artists who either sculpt physically, hand sculpt, or digitally sculpt with like a program like ZBrush, and those you work in different. Your brain works in different ways with that.
Well, a lot of it comes down to interface too. I think the VR interface of the touch controllers allows you to get a much more analog, result. It's,
one-to-one.
It's much more like sculpting, where it's not going to be perfect. It's going to look handmade.
And there's trade-offs with how much precision you can have. If it's going to be freeform, it's as precise as your hand movements are.
Right.
But also with interface, with the VR experience, there are also limitations with the resolution currently that you have in the headset. You're not going to be doing 8K, art drawings. You can scale up and down and add depth and density there, but also just the menu interfaces as well, because you have only so many buttons. Yes, your actions are more versatile than a keyboard or a mouse, but you also lose the ability to have keyboard shortcuts or in-depth tiered menus. Now, companies have tried to put menu systems in productivity tools in VR. Unreal, Epic Games, they made a version of their Unreal Engine that you can work in VR.
Amazing. I mean, that you could actually do everything that you can from the 2D interface in VR, and all the elements that don't translate very well into a 3D space, they've just put little iPad portals into the space.
Right. And the real advantage to designing something, especially if you're making a game in VR, whether it's a VR game or a traditional console game, is that it allows the game designer to see the scale, the relationship between the objects, the environment, the things they're creating, all those brushes, in real scale.
Yeah, that's not second nature yet to game developers. They're still trying to get that scale just right so that I don't feel like a dwarf or a giant when I step into a virtual space.
But I'm curious for those developers how intuitive it is without the keyboard shortcuts, without multiple monitors, with all their submenus and their asset libraries.
It's got to be a learning curve.
It absolutely must be.
They like to work quickly, and being stripped of all of those keyboard shortcuts is definitely, it's got to be a pain point. But the benefits are so exciting.
Now, another productivity and creativity tool that's been demoed in VR is one that generates not visual art, but audio art, music.
That's right, yeah. There's an app called Soundstage VR, which is really interesting because it doesn't have, there aren't as many sound apps because maybe it doesn't make quite as much logical sense. I mean, you don't need to be in VR to make great sound as you might for the type of artwork that you might be drawing. But it's a really neat way to track music. So they've taken virtual keyboards and sequencers and effects boxes and tracked music, and you can place these virtual devices all around yourself and then connect them with virtual wires. It's like having a lot of tech. It's like having a whole bunch of gear without having to drop more than a little bit of software on it.
And all of that gear can be simulated on your computer.
Yeah.
And yes, you can have on a desktop monitor like little windows that represent this gear and connect them. But here, you have so much actual volumetric space. The way your brain can recognize how things connect to each other, it's all spatial.
And I think importantly, it does have the same benefit as Medium or something might for sculpting, in that creating music should be there should be an analog interface to that. It's
the speed.
It's just like blowing air through a horn or something. That's not gonna be as accurate as a mouse movement, maybe, or a keyboard shortcut.
Right.
So when you're moving things around in space, or you're playing drums, or you're hitting a keyboard at different rates or different speeds, doing that with your hands creates a more handmade sense even to the sound, I would say, as it would to a visual medium.
And that's going to require, if they're going to really tap into that analog to the real world tools, require a developer to create physics engines that simulate the real world, because that's the only way that's going to work. Otherwise, hitting a drum, if it's not going to give you the response that you expect it to give you, it might as well just be tapping a button on a keyboard.
That's right.
Yeah. Well, we were recently at Silicon Valley VR, their SVVR conference, and we caught up with the makers of MakeVR, which is a 3D creativity tool powered by 6 Sense. They make the STEM motion controller system. They've partnered now with HTC Vive and it's an application now on Viveport. But we chatted with the product manager of MakeVR to learn about how they've approached making a professional-grade CAD tool in virtual reality.
Largely targeted for 3D printing.
Yes, so let's go check that out.
MakeVR, simple terms, we categorize it as a 3D content creation experience. It's a fully immersive CAD engine, basically. It's a professional-grade, industry-standard CAD engine that we have hiding under a really intuitive and natural two-handed interface that basically allows anyone to jump on in and start building solid 3D model content on day one.
So you guys have been working on MakeVR for a while now. I remember the Kickstarter you guys launched for the 6sense controllers. It really was a software tool to demonstrate positional tracking before we had positional track controllers as a normal thing. So how long has this development going, and what have you guys changed and learned since?
Yeah, MakeVR, like you stated, has been around for a little while. There was that Kickstarter effort that we sort of had to go around just because there weren't controllers available at the time. But what's changed since then is that we have partnered with HTC, and we've just launched MakeVR on Viveport, and HTC's been really integral in helping us sort of redefine and streamline the product. So the way that not the way that it functions, the way the user interacts with models is really much cleaner than it was a couple years ago, and that's largely in part due to HTC's efforts. The UI was designed basically to make things as simple as possible for people in a virtual environment, because what we have is a professional CAD engine. It's the ASUS CAD engine out of Dassault in France, and we've scaled it for VR. So the interface had to change, obviously. So we've over the years of iterating through different types of ways to interact with the tools and the functions, the interface now, it's a simple palette that pops up on your left hand where you have access to menus and tools and galleries, etc. And that was all just done basically through a process of seeing what felt the best, because in VR, it's feeling is a lot of what you're trying to accomplish, making people comfortable.
Simplicity sometimes can come at odds with complexity, at least complexity as we understand it on a 2D computer screen. You don't have a ton of menus or even keyboard shortcuts accessible in VR, so how is the UI? Is the UI have parity with a professional CAD program? Is that what you're going for, or what did you want people to get out of using MakeVR?
Good question. We're not trying to replace like any desktop CAD engine, SolidWorks, etc. What we're trying to do, and what we have done, is develop an application that allows people without 3D modeling experience, that don't want to take the time to learn a SolidWorks or a Blender, that don't want to pay for an AutoCAD or 3D Max or Maya, to come on in and start building real solid models with a very natural, intuitive interface. So we're not trying to replicate the CAD engine, but we do have access to all the function of the CAD engine in there. So this initial release is what we're terming advanced freeform modeling. So you have a nice suite of Boolean functions, colors, textures, sweeps, etc. The upcoming release is going to have precision tools in there for positional, rotational alignment, so you can accurately place objects within the scene to have them act upon each other or join them, cut them, etc.
You're talking about professional terms, Boolean functions, primitives. These are things that professional CAD modelers understand. For someone new coming into modeling, I understand sculpting in terms of a sculpting hand tool. Did you guys consider adding in, was it possible to add in analogs to real modeling tools?
We do have the ability to add surface deformations for things like sculpting, etc., but that's not really our goal. I mean, what we're looking for here is a solid modeling engine that people can generate viable content to send off to a 3D printer. So that's the basic focus of it right now, is for makers, etc., that want to 3D print content, whether it's for professional reasons or just for recreational. But this gives them a tool that they can build watertight, solid models on their very first time in there and send it right off the 3D printer without needing to do any tune-ups or modifications at all.
I hear that collaboration is going to be a big part of MakeVR in the future. People working together in models. Can you talk a little about how that works and your experimentation in that?
Yeah, we are planning on having a collaborative version of MakeVR, which basically will allow up to 5 people to work in a collaborative environment, communicating voice over IP, etc., in a real CAD engine in real time over a private network. So that's a really interesting idea when you consider a professional CAD engine as a multiplayer environment that people get in and iterate on concepts in real time. That's kind of a game changer.
Do you see some sort of asymmetrical collaborative experience where the models are designed on 2D spaces and then refined in VR, or started off in VR and then exported? Is that possible also?
Absolutely. I mean, as this is a CAD engine, you can import files, SAT, SAB files, bring them in and perform the CAD functions on them. You can export files out to Max Maya, other CAD programs. So yes, between the 2D and the 3D, there's a definite direct path. MakeVR is going to be an ever-evolving application. It's not stopping here. I mean, we've just barely scratched the surface of the CAD engine with this first release. So there will be subsequent releases with the precision tools and collaboration and physics and you name it, but we're just going to keep unlocking more and more of the functionality of this industry standard tool.
Awesome. Thank you so much. Thanks, Steve.
Thank you. Okay. Pleasure.
All right, Jeremy. So we both tried the MakeVR demo. We saw some of the 3D prints they made, and we've used Oculus Medium, we've used Quill.
This is different.
This is different. Yeah, what did you think about it?
There's a program called Tinkercad, which this reminded me of, which is a very, very accessible 3D modeling tool by Autodesk. It's a company that they acquired, and it's their entry level. Kids, check this out. Even you can do CAD modeling, and it's actually geared towards 3D printing as well. And it really just takes a lot of primitives and allows you to assemble them in a way that you can grok in about 5 minutes.
Yeah.
Now I stepped into this app and I got their interface in just as much time. I was really impressed by how intuitive it was, that they made the right decisions about what button does what. And I had a lot of fun playing with the scale of the world, because you can create primitives, you can start to construct them, and then if you want to move something to another part of the world, you move through space yourself by grabbing it, right? And you sort of swim or walk through the world with walking sticks. But it takes a while to get from one point of the world to the other, because it's one-to-one. But if you shrink the world down,
and to move it toward you,
it's like one motion, and I'm across the world.
Yeah.
And then I started to understand that there are aspects of designing a 3D element or environment that are better done from a macro standpoint.
Absolutely.
And some that are better done at micro.
Yeah.
And I was experimenting with that, and I was enjoying that understanding. And then when I found out that the thing is collaborative, I was like, oh, okay.
That's a big deal.
That's
here.
interesting.
Yeah, and the thing that they kept on reiterating was that this was based on their core engine is actually adapted from a professional CAD tool. They didn't create the CAD software, the engine themselves. They built the VR interface on top of it. So their focus is really how can VR tap into with the collaborative working on it, but how and the hand tools, how can these VR menu systems work and take advantage of the CAD? And the thing I kept on thinking back is, how does this differ from Medium? Because there are things I love about Oculus Medium, how easy it is to pick up, how intuitive it is to sculpt, to do deformations.
Right.
But some of the pain points of Medium is some of the ease of use Medium actually comes at the cost of the working model itself, what you can export. When we talk about Frank sculpting in Oculus Medium, importing OBJ files and kit bashing and exporting it out again, those files aren't watertight. They're not perfect for 3D printing. You have a lot of gaps and holes.
Right.
And if you hand sculpt an object like a sphere and then make a sculpture in Medium and export that, a lot of that detail that you see in the VR environment, you actually don't get in the model, because those are game engine effects, basically. They're special surface bump maps.
That look right on the screen, but not necessarily printed.
Right. And while in MakeVR, they emphasized that precision was such an important part of this CAD program, that what you see is what you get.
Right.
That you are precisely moving this cylinder by this much, cutting out this circle out of this block, and the wireframe would be exactly that.
Yeah, as someone who tinkers with 3D modeling, the lack of true precision in the app did strike me as something that might be problematic for people who really want to make symmetrical shapes, or shapes that are exactly centered or aligned properly.
Yeah.
But they said that that's coming in the next version, snapping and alignment tools. I think that'll really transform this into something beyond what I would call like a Tinkercad analogy.
And I think what people want is going to be the Google SketchUp, the SketchUp of VR, something you can, exactly align and make something this many, this long and this wide and this percentage big,
Right.
and build using your basic shapes, spheres, cylinders, cubes, and then build up environments, build up 3D models. Unfortunately, I don't think that does come at the cost of some intuitiveness, because a kid jumping into this,
You're right.
You want to sculpt with your hands. You want the analog to the hand tool, the sculpting tool. And when you have hand presence in VR, your hands are your most familiar tools. I don't want to be clicking and dragging and then aligning and then changing from subtract to addition. Like that's not, I don't consider that kind of like the building block analog.
Yeah, these are very geometric shapes that they are making. All of their demonstrations were clearly cylinders and cubes and triangles and pyramids. Like everything was composed of those, and very little was etched away. Like they do have Boolean options, right, where you can like carve out using a sphere or a cube. You can carve away from things, but you can't smooth and push like you can with clay, like you're saying. But I think that does lend itself to 3D printing. That is what they're trying to do. You're not trying to make a game object that looks realistic. You're trying to create a 3D printable object, which are typically highly geometric and relatively accurate.
And also, as you mentioned, the collaborative aspect, the fact that in a future release of this, you and I can work on the same model at different scales.
Love that.
Right? Like when you're talking about some things might be better to use at the macro scale and some at the micro scale. I could be doing the generic forms, the general forms, the big sweeping motions, and then you could be adding the tiny details.
And I would see you in the world, and you would look big to me because you're at that scale. Whereas if you shift the scale of the world, all I see changing is your size.
Yes.
To me, the world stays the same, which I think is pretty interesting.
I love that idea, and I think adding additional level of collaboration where you can then have someone on the 2D interface, an asymmetrical experience, or someone is sculpting in VR and then someone is using the CAD on a computer with a keyboard and mouse. That's the true potential.
They didn't talk about that, but that is interesting. That's another next level kind of thing. One aspect of the 3D printable design, I imagine it would be super simple, 5 seconds to create a shape that is basically your print volume that you could put into the world, and then you could start to place things within that to really get a sense of scale of what you can print and what you can't.
My hope is that companies like Autodesk and Adobe are working on VR tools, and because so much of their existing software suite is on the desktop, that they try to bridge that gap and not let VR creativity and productivity tools be sideload just in VR, but have some way to interface the desktop program and the VR program.
I think you're right. That's a really interesting prospect. I mean, because VR has such interesting implications, but the pain points are so obvious that a combination of the traditional and VR is probably a big part of the future.
And that's something that we hopefully will see in the future. Let us know what your thoughts are about VR creativity tools. If you're a designer, if you're a 3D artist, we'd love to hear from you in the comments. But before we get to our spotlight this week, this. So for our spotlight this week, it's Rock Band VR, a highly anticipated VR game in the Oculus Store. Now, Jeremy, you've been playing it since it came out, and what do you think about it?
I love this game, Norman. I love this game.
This is like a 180 turnaround because we were so skeptical about the conversion from Rock Band to the VR world.
Right, and that's the amazing part is they nailed it. Now, a lot of the reviews have been so-so on this game. They've been good. They've been 75%, that kind of thing. And it does have problems. It shouldn't be called Rock Band for once because you're the only one in the game.
Right.
So it should be a Guitar Hero game. And I'm sure if Harmonix had that license, that they would use it. So yes, it's given. It's a single-player Guitar Hero style game. But what they've done is they have looked at VR. They have said, what do we want? What does VR give you? It's presence.
Yes, it puts you on the stage.
Let's make the game all about that. So while this game could probably be done in 2D, using a traditional guitar on a two-dimensional screen, I would say like for the first time that a game has a certain level of presence that it requires VR.
Now, explain the game mechanic, because I
Okay.
play Guitar Hero, I play Rock Band, I see the flowing notes that come, I match up the rhythm game with the controller. Using the same controller, what can VR add?
Yeah, and it is the same controller. You bring a Rock Band guitar onto your computer, Xbox or PS4, and it just works. So instead of the note stream, they've scrapped that entirely, and they have said, let's rethink this. So it's basically all about chord progressions.
Okay.
So you have 7 different chords that you can play based on what buttons you're pressing down here. You've got like muted bar chords, octaves.
These are combinations
arpeggios.
of the 5 buttons.
That's right. So there's 7 of those, and as the music goes by, and you can sort of see the measures scrolling across a bar that goes horizontally, not at you.
Wow.
And you're on stage, and you're looking out over the audience, and above them there's this bar. And as the music goes down, they suggest chord progressions to you. And if you play those, you get bonus points. But as long as you play chord progressions that change on the beat, like on the measure, then it's happy with you. Then if you do chord progressions that make sense, like that repeat themselves, like, A, B, A, D, then you'll get extra points. So it's really an analogy to playing music.
Right, without having to memorize exactly where all the frets are.
That's right.
But you still get the sense that you're changing the chords. I mean,
And that's the brilliant part.
Because sounds complicated.
Because you don't have to be watching that the whole time. If you're playing traditional Rock Band, and this is like the most disturbing thing ever. I had my little spell in my life where I was in a band and we were playing at bars, and it was fantastic. Of course, we never became anything that people would cheer for like they do in Rock Band, but I enjoyed that aspect. And so whenever I would play the game Rock Band, it always disturbed me that people aren't playing with each other. They're all looking at the TV. No one's even making eye contact, and everyone's playing their own game. That's sort of the dirty secret of Rock Band, is even though you got 4 people playing together, everyone's playing their own little single-player game and then comparing scores. What this game does is it allows you not to stare at that note stream and to look out over the audience, look at your bandmates, to move around. You can do things like you can hit the cymbals with your guitar and make them crash.
Because the guitar itself is tracked.
That's right. And so you can get into the spirit of playing for a live audience, which comes back to this presence. And it's amazing. I mean, I had a couple moments the first day this came out where I was truly elated. I mean, it was that depth, it was that I feel like I'm doing this thing for real. It was something I haven't really felt since maybe Elite Dangerous when I was in that cockpit flying that spaceship.
Yeah, and there is the game aspect to it. You can play it to go for score.
There's a leaderboard, absolutely, and there's something to that. And what's really cool is that you actually the chords that you play affect the sound of the song.
Oh, it's not just you flub the button and then you hear a dissonant chord.
No.
It actually the actual types of chords you play.
That's right.
Changes. How do they compose that into the game?
Well, I think for every song, I think there's 60 songs in the game. They have different guitar tracks based on every single chord for the entire song. And so whatever you're playing is the one that gets played in the song. Wow. And so that's quite a lot of music that they've had to create for the game. But as the player, I feel like I'm improvising. I feel like I'm expressing myself as a member of that band in the song based on the chords that I choose to play. And if it's a soft part, I might play a muted chord. And as it gets louder and louder, I might go for a power chord. And it's something that you would do as a musician. And I think for the first time, a video game allows you to express that level of musicianship.
Now, does it take advantage of the other tracked aspects of your presence, your head?
Yeah.
And I mean, you're not holding touch controllers. You're holding the guitar.
No.
You attach it to the back
Yes.
using a touch controller.
Yeah, the touch controller slides onto the neck of the guitar, and then it goes down into this. You want to pull that through?
Yes.
It goes down into an attachment that comes with the touch controllers. Mm-hmm. So hopefully people didn't throw those away. I might be, I always get the controller wrong. Okay. But you get the idea. It sits into this thing on
Right,
the back.
right.
And so that's how they track the guitar. And then same thing with Rock Band Guitar Hero. In order to activate your overdrive, you throw the guitar up.
Yep.
So if you've charged up your overdrive, then the whole you become like this blue emanating thing, and you're crazy power, and and then everyone's excited about what you're doing, but you can extend that by bobbing your head to the beat.
Oh, interesting.
And it doesn't have to be like on a set tempo. Any chosen tempo, as long as it's to the beat of the song, will extend that, and you'll get bonus points. It'll say like head banging, and you can also swing the guitar back and forth. in order to extend that, or you can jump up and down.
Wow.
So they're trying to get you to get into the spirit of the music.
Yeah.
That's just part of the gameplay. And it works. It seriously works. I let my 10-year-old son play the game, and he's there like bobbing along and like jumping to the beat, and he loves this game even more than Rock Band.
That's amazing. That's really cool. I got to try this out. Rock Band VR. It's out now. You have to buy the actual guitar controller. Which can you buy these individually now, separately?
No, it's basically an Xbox One or a PS4, guitar that you're buying. And then I think if there is a version that comes with the Rock Band VR code, but it's basically you just want to pick up a guitar and
Just find one on
get it
eBay
working.
or
Yeah,
Craigslist,
sure.
and then attach your touch controllers to that. I'm glad you enjoy it. I'm glad it's a different way. You're creating music. You're actually contributing to, you're collaborating with the software engineers who've scripted all these versions of the songs.
Yeah.
That's awesome.
I think we're going to look back on this as an important game. I mean, it's the first mass market game that's had any kind of tracked controller that comes out for it. But they really thought about presence and what that means for gameplay.
That's really cool. And maybe in the future version, there will be a band aspect, a multiplayer aspect. I would love to see this be successful so they get to continue, because it
That'd be
seems like
great.
they've brought some new ideas to Rock Band VR. Well, that does it for us for this episode of Projections. We'll be back next week with more spotlights, more interviews, more talk about concepts in virtual reality and stuff from our visit to Silicon Valley, the VR conference. But if you have thoughts, comments yourselves, please post them in the comment section below. And Jeremy and I will see you next time.